familiar with Denton's, we are a global law firm. We have 200 offices in 82 countries. Perhaps most importantly for this, though, we have offices in Lexington and Louisville. I have been practicing cannabis law full-time since 2015. I represent hundreds of clients in the cannabis space. My clients range from touch the plant businesses, some of whom are standalone, some of whom are vertically integrated. They cultivate, manufacture, and sell. I represent investors, ancillary businesses, financial institutions, insurance companies, Native American tribes, all related to cannabis licensing and regulatory work. And I'm joined here today with two of my colleagues from Kentucky, Kristen McCall and David Tandy. And I'm gonna have David, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Hannah. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is David Tandy. I'm a partner in the Louisville office of Denton's. I practice in the public policy economic development practice groups here in the firm. Essentially, I focus a lot of my work on local government solutions. Being that in my prior life, I was the president of the Louisville City Council, and so do a lot of work with localities and the clients that look to engage local governments on their various business and legal endeavors in the particular setting. So we're certainly glad to have each and every one of you on the webinar with us this afternoon, and look forward to presenting this information to you and answering any questions that you may have later. And now I'll turn it over to Kristen.
Hi, I'm Kristen McCall. I'm also a partner in the Louisville office of Denton's. And I am in our commercial litigation practice. But over the past year, I've been working with Hannah on cannabis litigation in Maine. And so I have developed quite a bit of experience in a variety of different ways that litigation can come into play in the cannabis field.
So now I'm just going to get into our agenda so folks have a sense of what we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk, there's a kind of a range of folks who seem to be on the webinar today, from folks who are already participating in the cannabis space to folks who perhaps are brand new to it. So I'm going to be mindful of that, but we do want to start with an overview of kind of federal and state cannabis laws nationally, talk about some political and state trends. Then we're going to give you a high-level overview of SB 47, that's Kentucky's act regarding medicinal marijuana. We're going to talk a little bit about anticipated timelines for licensing in Kentucky, some action items that businesses who are interested in participating in the market want to start thinking about now. And then we're going to talk to you about local control. And this is actually the first of a series of webinars that we're planning on doing. And the reason why we picked local control as kind of the subject matter for this one is that at least right now, unless the law changes, Kentucky's law is not, there's no statewide limitation on licenses, but it does give a lot of discretion to municipalities. A town can ban marijuana businesses. And so as an operator, it is critical, if you want to get a license, to make sure that you are able to find a location in a municipality that allows cannabis businesses in a location that meets all of the local rules. And we're going to talk to you about that. That is your key to getting a license in Kentucky. So that's why we're going to focus a lot of today's presentation on local control, what that looks like, what you can do to start communicating with your town, and if the town you want to be in says no, what your options are. So I'm going to start really quickly talking about federal law. And it is critically important in the cannabis space that we all kind of remember that cannabis continues to be a Schedule I drug. What that means is that the production, possession, and sale of cannabis is illegal under federal law. And anyone who is producing or selling or cultivating marijuana, even in a state where it's legal for either medical or recreational adult use purposes, is violating federal law. And there have been some bipartisan bills and efforts at the federal level to change the legal status, but none of those have been successful. So that is the current status of federal law. So despite that, cannabis legalization is incredibly popular. 88% of people in the US say cannabis should be legal for medical or recreational adult use. Just 1 in 10 individuals say that marijuana should not be legal. There is similar support, or at least polls have shown similar support in Kentucky. So 90% in recent polling of Kentucky adults supported legalization of medical cannabis. 60% of adults in Kentucky supported legalization under any circumstances, so adult use and medical cannabis. For that reason, because legalization is so popular and the support for legalization has kind of increased exponentially over the years, states have decided, even though this continues to be federally legal, we are going to give the people what they want. We're going to legalize and regulate marijuana. So as of now, 40 states in the District of Columbia have legalized medical cannabis, and 22 states in the District of Columbia have legalized adult use or recreational cannabis. The way that the federal government has dealt with these states deciding to kind of diverge from federal law is that there have been a series of memos from the Department of Justice. The first was in 2013 that said, basically, we're going to have this blanket policy for US prosecutors. It says you cannot prosecute state legal cannabis businesses. That was rescinded in 2018 with the message being, federal prosecutors across the country, you have discretion, you know how to exercise it. You can make the decision as to whether or not it's appropriate for you to take action and prosecute individuals who are operating in violation of federal law, but in compliance with state law. The messaging from the current administration is that we are likely to get another memo. Attorney General Merrick Garland has said that they expect this year to issue a memo similar to the Cole memo from 2013, giving kind of uniform guidance to prosecutors across the country. But until then, businesses' abilities to participate in states that have legalized is really contingent on the federal prosecutors in those jurisdictions recognizing that these state laws are robust and that it's not worth them exercising their discretion to go after those businesses. And this disconnect between federal and state law is really important as you're kind of entering and operating into the cannabis space, because it means that your business, the rules are just different. And the rules around, and it impacts, how you're going to fund your business, how you're going to structure your business planning, what part of the market do you want to be in? How do I write my contracts? And it's just really important that you be working with professionals, financial institutions, attorneys, insurance companies that understand cannabis, because there is this really important cannabis overlay to all of these business decisions. So before I turn and start talking about the law in Kentucky, I just want to kind of give you a sense of what the cannabis market looks like in the United States and what it might look like in Kentucky. Because one of the questions people ask is, it's complicated, it's federally illegal. Why is this a space that I might want to enter into? And while this is a business decision, it is very rare that anyone has the opportunity to enter into a wholly new market. In Kentucky, cannabis, marijuana has been 100% illegal, same status as federal law, until and still, because there's no market set up, like it's not legal to possess or purchase it. But the first license holders under Kentucky law are going to be the first people to legally sell marijuana in Kentucky. And there's a big advantage to being first to market in a brand new industry. And the market is growing, and it's growing exponentially. So in 2023, across the US, retail sales of marijuana are expected to be around $33 billion. By 2028, it's expected that will increase to $56 billion. Market projections in Kentucky are really preliminary, and there's not much data, but based on other states like Alabama and Mississippi, who have also legalized medical in a similar way, the projections that are out there suggest that the total sales in the first 3 years are going to be around $500 million. So there is an economic opportunity here. So let's talk a little bit about what Kentucky Senate Bill 47 does. So this bill, which was an act regarding medicinal cannabis, was signed into law by Governor Bashir on March 31st, 2023. It legalizes the medical use of cannabis in Kentucky with a certification from a qualified healthcare provider. That medical marijuana has to be purchased, has to be produced by a licensed operator and purchased from a licensed dispensary. So until a market is stood up, until licenses are issued and those businesses are operational, there is no legal place for anyone to access medical cannabis. It also authorizes the Cabinet of Health and Family Services to essentially stand up a marketplace to issue licenses to companies who want to test medical cannabis, cultivate medical cannabis, manufacture medical cannabis, and sell medical cannabis in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. In addition to authorizing the Cabinet for Health and Family Services to do that, it creates the Kentucky Center for Cannabis. The Kentucky Center for Cannabis is essentially a board mostly of healthcare providers that has the mandate to help provide guidance to the rulemaking process. They're also charged with making decisions about what qualifying conditions should be added or taken away from the law, what diagnoses somebody can access medical cannabis for. And they've also been charged with making decisions about what is an appropriate single use 10 days supply or 30-day supply in order for the regulators to determine how much medical marijuana an individual should legally be able to possess and legally be able to buy. So those of you who have been in the cannabis space are going to recognize a lot of the regulatory framework in Kentucky's medical cannabis law. Kentucky has the benefit of, 30 plus other states already having legalized medical cannabis, implemented those regulations, and operated programs for several years. When I first started doing work in cannabis, there weren't many states that had legalized. There weren't really kind of best practice regulatory practices. A lot has changed since then. So one of the things that we often see in these laws and that Kentucky has incorporated into its laws is statutorily prescribed qualifying conditions. So the only people that can access medical cannabis are people who have received a certification from a qualified healthcare provider who's been authorized by the medical licensing board to certify patients and who has diagnosed them with one of these conditions. These conditions include cancer, epilepsy, debilitating, severe or chronic pain, multiple sclerosis, chronic vomiting, post-traumatic stress. But again, after the program rolls out and even within the next year, the Kentucky Center for Cannabis can make determinations that there are other diagnoses that it would be appropriate to add to this list of qualifying conditions. So the Kentucky law also has some kind of general limitations on the types of products that could be sold and how medical marijuana can be used. So these limitations include limitations on THC content. So for raw plant material, cannabis flower, THC content cannot exceed 35%. For edibles, THC content can't be more than 10 milligrams of Delta-9 THC per serving. And for other products like concentrates and vape cartridges, the THC content cannot exceed 70%. Users in Kentucky under the bill, patients are not permitted to consume marijuana by smoking, but smoking is defined pretty narrowly and it's smoking flower. So the law does allow for consumption of medical marijuana through inhalation, whether that's vape cartridges or use of concentrates. And there are some pretty robust restrictions around advertising in Kentucky's law. So the law creates 6 different license types. So there's a cultivation license, a processor license, a producer license, a dispensary license, and a safety compliance facility, which is essentially a testing facility. And for all of these licenses, there are some restrictions around who can be owners and operators. So in order to get a license, the owners and the principals must all be 21 years of age or older. There is going to be a requirement that businesses must demonstrate financial capacity to open and operate the business. Anybody who has a felony drug offense or a felony that could be categorized as an offense of violence would be precluded from participating. There are some time limitations on that. And no one who is a medical cannabis practitioner, so nobody who is a medical health provider who has been authorized to issue certifications to patients for medical cannabis can be an owner of one of these businesses. So within the cultivation licenses, there's 4 different tiers. So the smallest cultivators are going to be 2,500 square feet of interior growth area. The largest cultivators are not going to be able to exceed 50,000 square feet of interior growth area. Cannabis processors licenses are going to go to people who want to produce value-added products, who want to purchase cannabis flower and create concentrates, edibles, beverages, capsules, transdermal patches, any value-added product. A cannabis producer is a license that is going to authorize the holder to both cultivate and manufacture value-added products. So there will be, under a single license, there'll be 2 separate authorized uses. Cannabis dispensaries are retail stores, and then your safety compliance facilities are your testing labs. So the lab that's going to test the product to make sure it meets all the health and safety standards, and so that people can report THC content on their labels. Kentucky is a permissible vertical. We go back, Jordan. Kentucky is a permissible vertical integration state. So what that means is that while each of these licenses is a separate license based on location and type, so you can, if you want to cultivate and manufacture, you need 2 separate licenses, but the law doesn't prohibit you from having multiple licenses or multiple license types, with the exception of you cannot have a license to operate a testing facility and have any of the other operator licenses. So you could, under this law, get a license to cultivate, manufacture, and retail, and you could get multiple of those licenses. There are no limitations under state law on the number of licenses that you could hold or the number of licenses that the state is going to issue. I'm going to qualify that by saying that there is going to be another legislative session before this law actually rolls out and is implemented, and it is possible that there could be changes to anything that we're talking about during that legislative session, including limitations on licenses. There are the other things that the other kind of limitations in the law is there is a mandatory setback of 1,000 feet from schools and daycares. So David's going to talk to you a little bit about kind of other things that municipalities can do, but municipalities are going to be precluded from allowing marijuana businesses, if they want to allow them, from being located closer to a school or a daycare than 1,000 feet. So one of the things, this law is actually really pretty robust, but the implementing regulations, the devil is in the details. There are 20 different areas that the law identifies where the regulatory authority is going to need to develop rulemaking. And so these include inventory tracking. So most states have mandatory electronic seed to sale tracking. There's going to have to be rulemaking around that, rulemaking around packaging and labeling, additional rulemaking around marketing and advertising, rulemaking around the licensing process. The regulators are going to have to develop a license application for people to complete, rules around security, rules around, for example, extraction. So what safety standards would have to be in place for what we kind of generally call inherently hazardous extraction. That's not the term in the law. So, so one thing I guess, Kristen's reminding me, and I don't think I said this at the beginning, that if you do have questions, if you want to put them in the question and answer section, we are going to do we're going to try to answer questions at the end. And then if we aren't able to, we'll follow up via email and make sure that we get your question answered for you. And so, timeline, like the timeline on when licenses and sales are going to be available is really going to kind of depend on how long it takes to get these rules adopted, how long it takes to roll out applications. And in addition to rulemaking around the program itself, the licensing board, the medical licensing board, is directed to develop rules around licensing for healthcare providers that want to be issuing medical marijuana certifications. But we have some thoughts on kind of what these timelines might look like. The cabinet is instructed in the law to adopt rules by July 1, 2024. So we expect that they will be going through, this rulemaking process over the course of the next year or so. It's our understanding that in the next few weeks, they'll likely announce the director and then kind of start that process. It will likely take, almost that full period of time to kind of adopt these rules. These programs tend to be complicated. There's a wide variety of topics that end up being regulated. And as somebody who is interested in participating in the market, it is really important, and we would strongly advise following that rulemaking process, because that really can, and oftentimes can, inform some of the business decisions that you're making as you go. And there's always a public participation component to that. And it's really important, in my experience, for the regulators, particularly in a brand new market, to hear from stakeholders and to understand kind of what the stakeholders' position is, how proposed rules might impact you as a stakeholder. And so we're going to be monitoring that process. We're happy to help people with that. And it's something that you'll be able to monitor and participate in on your own as well. We think it's unlikely that applications for licenses will be available before Q3 or Q4 of 2024. The law does require that the regulators, once a completed application has been submitted, they have 45 days to grant or deny the license. That's a very fast turnaround. And one of the things, there's a lot that we don't know about what the licensing process is going to look like, because a lot of it is left to rulemaking. But one thing that we do know is that the law expressly provides that a license can be denied if the regulator determines that that the applicant, either their proposal is going to violate the local law, or they haven't gotten the local approvals that they need. So like I talked about at the beginning, one of the reasons that we're talking about the local approval and the local control provisions today is that we know that this could be a reason why your application is denied. And it's really something that you should be thinking about now. We expect that, if everything goes along smoothly, if rules are adopted by July 1 of 2024, if applications are issued and available to complete by Q3 or Q4 of 2024, that, we may end up seeing first sales in Kentucky Q1, Q2, first half of 2025. It could be faster. It could be slower. It's, there are some states that are able to get their programs up and off the ground in 6 months. I will tell you, in Maine, which is the first state that I started practicing in, it took 4 years. So there is kind of a pretty wide range of time. The reality is, though, you may be asking yourself, okay, we're not even going to have final rules until a year from now. Why are we here now? And you should be here now, and you should be thinking about this now, because there are a lot of things that need to be put in place before you're even able to file an application. And July 2024 may feel far away, but 12 months goes by really quickly. And some of the things that folks should be thinking about is developing a business plan. Do we want to be a cultivator? Do we want to manufacture? Do we want to be vertically integrated? Why? What's that going to look like? What's our team going to look like? Putting together your corporate structure, understanding kind of the unique tax implication for cannabis companies, being really thoughtful about who your partners are in this space, raising capital. So it's not an easy task to raise capital in any industry right now, but in cannabis in particular, cannabis businesses do not have access to traditional financing. Well, banks, there are some financial institutions that do work with cannabis businesses and do some lending, and we have at least one financial institution, local financial institution, that does some lending in the cannabis space in Ohio, and Kentucky is within its jurisdiction. For the most part, cannabis businesses cannot get loans or lines of credit from banks or credit unions. And so being really thoughtful about how much money do we need, where's that money going to come from early on is really important, because even if you have a history of operating a business or many businesses where you've been able to go into the bank and get that revolving line of credit, and that's how you got the business off the ground, that may not be an option in the cannabis space. So the other thing that's going to be really, really important, and is going to take a lot of time, and I'm going to turn this over to my colleagues in a minute to talk more about this, is the local approval process. So because the law allows towns to ban cannabis businesses, it's going to be critical, if you have a location in mind, that you are making sure that you're going to be able to operate in that space. And this process, this local process, can take months. Just getting a town to start talking about this can sometimes take months. And so it is really important for all of these reasons that if you are interested in being first to market, if you want to be one of those first people who's completing and filing those applications, that you're thinking about all of these action items now, but in particular, the local control and local approval. And David, I'm gonna turn it over to you now to kind of talk a little bit about the local approval or local control provisions in the law and what people should be doing.
Well, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Hannah. Jordan, if you wouldn't mind, go back a couple of slides to the action items that need to take place. And one more, thank you. And if you notice on this particular slide, one of the first things that we're suggesting that you do as a potential business or investor in the medical cannabis space is to start initiating discussion with localities where you intend to operate. And the importance for that, for you to be able to do that, is because, as Hannah has made very clear to everyone, this particular law gives local governments the ability to determine if and when medical cannabis can be sold in their localities, where it can be sold, how it can be sold, etc. And so you want to start having conversations now with these, with your elected officials in the particular communities where you want to operate, as well as some other interested players that are in that space. If for nothing else, to start the education process. Jordan, go back to go forward a couple of slides to the local approval slide that we have. So just to kind of give us an overview of what we mean by local approval, let's define some terms for everyone. First, as it relates to local government, what we mean by that is the city government, the county government, the urban county government, which there we're specifically talking about Fayette County, or consolidated local government, that is Jefferson County, Louisville Metro government that we're talking about there, charter county government, or unified local government. Other definitions, so then as it relates to local governments, what they have the ability to be able to do, as I've kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, they have the ability to regulate the time, the place, and the manner of which a cannabis business can operate. They can prohibit all cannabis business from operating within a particular locality via the passage of an ordinance that they would pass at the legislative body of that local government. And then they can enact other resolutions directing that the question prohibiting cannabis sales from being operated in the locality being taken to the voters of that locality at their next general election. So essentially what you have here is the local governments have, and their legislative bodies have the opportunity either on their own to go ahead and say, yes, we're going to allow for medical cannabis to be sold in their particular community, or they can decide to pass that decision making on to the public at large and allow for a ballot initiative essentially to take place in that locality. And Kristen's going to go into the details of that. But essentially, when we're talking about a ballot initiative, what we're talking about is a campaign either for an up or down vote on whether or not medical cannabis will be allowed to be sold in a particular jurisdiction. Jordan, if you wouldn't mind, next slide, please. So here, when we're talking about local approval, if the local government entity, in this case, decides to approve the operations in their operations within their jurisdiction, they can do that by ordinance. If they then decide that they're going to submit this to a vote at their next election, then what they're doing there is they're allowing for the general public to make that determination. And so what's critical in all of this is to start the education process to the public and to those local elected officials. Understand what you want to do in a perfect world would be to get the local elected officials comfortable enough with medical marijuana and how the operations are going to move forward, whether it be on the retail side or on the production side of this particular product, to understand how it's going to roll out so that they are comfortable with it and passing it at that level. And a lot of part of that is going to come from as well, having a broader conversation with key constituencies within the particular locality where you're looking to operate, to educate them and get them comfortable as well. Remember this, local elected officials are driven by their constituents. So if they're getting a lot of phone calls from constituents who are saying, look, we don't want something, or they get calls from their constituents saying, I'm in favor of this. This is how this is going to be beneficial and helpful to our community. We're comfortable with where these particular operations are going to be able to take place. And if they get a good sense of that in the positive sense early on, then you're making your job a lot easier in terms of being able to operate and develop your business. Otherwise, if you have to then put a matter up for vote to the broader public, it makes your job a little bit more difficult. But nonetheless, if you do the legwork early on, you'll find yourself being more successful. Because as Christian will talk about here, when we get into petition processes for this, essentially you have a 4-month ramp if you don't do the early education on this issue. And if you wait until after you get your petition certified and the county clerk allows for it to go onto the ballot, which will take place on the first Tuesday in August of the year where the election is going to take place, you're only limiting yourself to a 4-month window to be able to educate the public. And understand, for a public, or for that matter, anybody, to understand and be moved by a message that you're trying to put out to the public, it takes at least 7 times for that message to be heard, for it to resonate with voters, and then for them to take the action that you want to. So you want to give yourself as much time as you possibly can to, one, clear your pathway and make it as easy as possible to gain support and approval, but then also to be able to win the persuasion argument in the locality where you're looking to operate, to do that as well. Jordan, if we go to the next slide, what we wanted to do here was just to kind of show you some examples of what cultivation looks like, extraction, and then edible manufacturing looks like. Because for the most part, a lot of people, when you're dealing with these type of issues, they conjure images up in their head, and they may be thinking one thing when it's actually something else. So in this case here, when we're talking about cultivation, we're talking about contained, well-defined environments where the plant itself is going to be grown. Jordan, next slide. When we're talking about extraction, we're talking about this being done in manufacturing facilities that are very much akin to commercial food processing facilities that everybody is familiar with operating as well. And then finally, if you go to the edible manufacturing place, again, we're finding it's the same thing. It's no different than if you were going to have a cookie factory in your particular locality, how that would operate or how that would look. And then finally, when we get into what a retail space looks like, it looks like just your traditional retail store, or kind of similar to kind of what we're familiar with now with vape stores and other things like that. So a lot of this is going to be, again, educating the public, educating the local elected officials who are, quite frankly, members of the public as well. They just got the title and the ability to make a vote on the legislative body of that particular locality. But you want to educate everybody along the way as to what this is going to look like and where you're going to be operating, so that people are very comfortable and familiar with how things are going to go forward, so that then you can gain the level of support that you need for your particular endeavor. With that, I'm going to turn over the more of the specifics as it relates to the petitioning process over to Kristen. So Kristen.
And Kristen, before you start, can I just say a couple of things on the local process? So a couple of points I want to make is that in my experience, retail tends to be the trickiest. Retail is where the public interfaces with cannabis, where it's the most in people's faces. And if retail is your goal, really starting kind of to identify communities that you think will be open to retail and starting to have those conversations is critical. Manufacturing and cultivation, you can cultivate outdoors, you can cultivate indoors, but the vast majority of commercial legal cultivation tends to be indoors. These buildings are nondescript. They're usually in your industrial facilities. They're not, and part of it is educating your elected officials on this. Like, this is going to be in an area of town, usually, like it fits within the land use, like your land use types in your industrial or your commercial areas. People aren't even going to know what it is. And then also educating them around, that the issues that you're dealing with here from a local regulatory standpoint are land use issues that are the same issues that they deal with every day with every other commercial operator. They have the tools to do this. There's really no reason to be treating cannabis businesses differently. They need to be thinking about traffic. They need to be thinking about the lighting. They need to be thinking about odor, noise, but these are the same things that they think about whenever they're trying to regulate other commercial businesses and approve those operations. And so that's a big part of educating them, is these are kind of commercial, industrialized businesses. They're very much within the wheel, regulating them and understanding what their impacts are very much within the wheelhouse of what you do every day.
And one other point that I like to make as well on this is, not only are we talking, when we talk about on the local government side of things and educating the elected officials and the community at large, you also want to be actively engaged in the rulemaking aspect of this as well. Hannah alluded to it earlier during her portion of the presentation, that rules are being promulgated right now. It is always better to be on the front end of the discussion and sharing with the rule makers in Frankfurt who will be writing these rules and regulations, how things will operate in the real world, or how you would like to see them operate, versus trying to get things changed on the back end once they've already been promulgated and then put out to the broader public. And so we're again, if you hear nothing else that we say as it relates to the efforts that you need to start engaging with right now, is engaging us, if you so choose, engage us from a government relations standpoint, to be able to start having those conversations with your state and local elected officials and rule makers, to make sure that your interests and concerns are being addressed on the front end as well. Kristen?
Thanks, David. So I'll be talking a bit about the petition process right now. And just to give you a little bit of background about my experience with the petition process in the Commonwealth, for those of you who are from Louisville, you might remember, but for those of you who aren't, a few years ago, the Jefferson County School Board, so the school board that serves most of Jefferson County, which is where Louisville is, passed a tax that was high enough that it allowed for a petition to be circulated to place the question of the tax on the ballot of the general election in 2020, November of 2020. And I worked on the case that challenged the validity of the petition that had been circulated and certified by the Jefferson County clerk to place that tax on the ballot. And we successfully challenged the certification of that petition and ended up getting the question stricken from the ballot. And so I have experience not with the petition process that's established under SB 47, but I do have experience with the petition process in Kentucky. And so with that background, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what the petition process looks like under SB 47 as it's currently written. Of course, as Hannah mentioned, this could be amended at the next legislative session. But currently, if a local government prohibits prohibits medical cannabis businesses in the locality pursuant to an ordinance, SB 47 establishes a petition process by which any person or any group of people can circulate a petition, and if they gather enough signatures on that petition of registered voters in the locality, they can place the question of whether medical cannabis businesses can operate in the locality on the ballot of the next regular election. And by next regular election, that means the next election that's scheduled for I think it's the second Tuesday in November. I think it's the second Tuesday in November. Let me check that. It might be the first. No, it's the second Tuesday in November. So we aren't talking about primaries here. We're talking about a regular election. So in November. And it's important to note that there is not a regular election, I don't think, every year. So you should be looking at the calendar to figure out when the next regular election is, so that you can make sure that you're circulating a petition in time to place it on the ballot at the next regular election. SB 47 does not have requirements that a person who circulates a petition has to be a registered voter in the locality. So any person or any group of people can choose to circulate such a petition. I definitely would recommend that if you are looking to establish a cannabis business in a certain locality that is prohibited by ordinance, the cannabis businesses in that locality, that you try to get at least one local person to be a petitioner to help circulate that petition, someone who knows people in the community, because that will help gather signatures and also, give credence to the petition that you're circulating amongst local voters in that locality. Before this petition can be circulated for signatures, the person or persons who intend to circulate the petition must file an intent to circulate the petition with a copy of the petition to the county clerk of the affected locality. The petition is required to set out in full this question, and SB 47 sets out that question specifically. And the question is, are you in favor of the sale of medicinal cannabis at a licensed dispensary and the operation of other cannabis businesses in the affected territory? And of course, you would fill in the affected territory where it needs to be filled in. The petition has to be signed by a number of qualified voters of the affected territory that is equal to at least 5% of registered voters in the affected territory. Can you go to the next slide, Jordan? Thanks. So the average Kentucky County population based on 22 estimates is 37,603 people. So a petition filed in a Kentucky county with an average population will require signatures of approximately 1,881 people. But it's important to note that it's not just based on population, it's registered voters. And so when you notify the county clerk of your intent to circulate a petition, you should ask the county clerk what number of signatures you need, meaning what is 5% of the number of the registered voters in the county or the locality at that time. In the case of the Jefferson County School Board tax, that statute required 10% of voters who voted in the last general election, which in Jefferson County was approximately 32,000 signatures. In smaller counties, obviously, you'll be dealing with much smaller numbers. So it's just important to know the number that you're going to need before you start circulating the petition. SB 47 currently does not allow for electronic signatures to the petition. So each signature has to be executed in ink or indelible pencil, so pencil that can't be changed or erased. And after the signature, it has to include the signatory's printed name, their address, the year of their birth, and the date that it was signed. And all of this information is going to be used by the county clerk's office to confirm whether that person is in fact a registered voter in the locality. So their residence should match the residence that's currently listed in their voter registration. And their year of birth also, of course, should match the year of birth that's listed on their voter registration. The petition can only be circulated for up to 6 months before it is filed with the clerk's office. So that gives you a lot of time to collect signatures, but it's important that you keep track of that time and know when you want to file your petition so that you know when you need to start circulating the petition in order to file it on the date that you want to file it. Next slide. Jordan, can you go to the next slide? Thanks. If the petition has been certified as sufficient prior to the second Tuesday of August that precedes the day established for the next regular election, then the county clerk will certify the question and put it on the next regular election ballot. The county clerk has 30 days to certify the petition sufficiency or the lack thereof after the petition is filed with the county clerk. If the county clerk finds that there are not a sufficient number of signatures of registered voters from the locality on the petition, then you have 30 days to remedy any insufficiency in the petition, and then the county clerk will have an additional 10 days to certify the supplemental petition's sufficiency. It's really critical that you do not miss the August deadline for filing a sufficient petition, because if you miss that deadline, which is the second Tuesday in August preceding the next regular election, the question cannot go on the ballot until the following next regular election, which could be a year from then or 2 years from then. So it's really important that deadline of the second Tuesday in August be kept in mind when you're planning out the petition process to ensure that you're going to have a sufficient petition by that date. And if the question that's placed on the ballot loses, Another question cannot be placed on the ballot for 3 years. Jordan, can you go to the next slide? Oh, never mind. So when you're thinking about the petition process, there are a few things that you should keep in mind. I already said that you should ask the clerk's office how many signatures you need based on the current number of registered voters in the county or in the locality before you start circulating the petition. The larger the affected territory, the more signatures you will likely need. It's important to remember that, again, you're not just getting signatures of anyone that lives in the county. They have to be registered voters. And because of that, you won't know if someone that you're asking to sign the petition is a registered voter. They might tell you they are, but you can't confirm that because you don't have access to the voter registration records. So you should aim to get a much larger number of signatures than the 5% that's required, than the number that's required, so that you can make sure that anyone that signed that isn't a registered voter is not necessary to be counted in order for your petition to be sufficient. And like I already said, the timing of this is critical. Since the petition must be certified by the second Tuesday of August, preceding the next regular election, you should plan in time backwards for each step of the process. So you should plan backwards 10 days for the clerk's office to judge the sufficiency of an amendment to an insufficient petition. You should then go back 30 days to circulate sheets for an amendment to an insufficient petition. Then 30 days more for the clerk's office to judge the sufficiency of the original petition. And then this means that the original petition needs to be filed with the clerk's office at least 70 days prior to the second Tuesday in August, which is likely late May or early June. So you should then file the intent to circulate the petition with sufficient time before that late May or early June deadline to get a sufficient number of signatures.
Christian, if I could, just to kind of
Yes.
like touch on the point where you're talking about getting the signatures for the petition. You know, there are a couple of different ways that you can go about getting those signatures. One is, as Christian alluded to, is the typical kind of way you may think about it is like somebody standing outside of the grocery store, and as people are walking into the grocery store, you're asking them, hey, you know, would you mind signing this, you know, petition in support of the sale of medical marijuana, you know, in our particular community? That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is very similar to the way that we, if we're running a campaign and we're trying to put new voters either onto the rolls, or for that matter, we're trying to make sure that we're getting our message out to the voters that we're wanting to get to the polls to vote for us for a particular election or for a particular issue. You can take the voter roll itself and you know who's registered and who's not, and then do essentially like a door-to-door campaign where you're going to that voter's door and saying, "May I speak to Mr. or Miss Smith?" And Miss Smith answers the phone. "Would you mind?" or answers the door. "Hi, I'm David Tandy. I'm with the medical cannabis yes in Louisville campaign. Would you mind signing this petition saying that you're in favor of this?" And then getting them to sign that way. That going through that process, and as Christian said, getting more signatures than you need to in order to meet the certification process. One, it gives you more of a sense of security, knowing that the signatures you have are valid and that they'll stand up to any scrutiny that the county clerk may be able to put forth as they're doing their review. But these type of things, running your campaign and getting the signature for the petition itself, and then helping on the government relations side of things on the front end in terms of getting the local support, as well as then operating your business in and of itself. All of these are things that we can help you do here at Denton's.
And it's really important to remember that this petition process is twofold. Many states have created these petition processes. I've participated in a lot of them. And I can tell you, it's one thing to collect the signatures, but you still need to make sure that you get the votes. And so I've seen over and over again, people collect the signatures, become overly confident that they have the votes to pass, not really be pounding the pavement in the way they should be to campaign to make sure they get that. And then all of that work is lost. And then again, here in Kentucky, if you lose, it doesn't go back on. You can't even get it back on for another 3 years.
Right.
So it's really important to kind of, one, make sure that you're collecting the signatures in a way where you're going to withstand scrutiny of both the clerk, but also a legal challenge. And then once you've gotten your signatures and it's been certified, making sure that you're campaigning around it so that you end up getting those votes.
Sorry, Hannah, really quickly. And related to that, I think it also depends on what type of regular election it is, because for a presidential election year, for example, you're going to get a lot more people coming to the polls to vote than in just a local election year where it's going to be a much more limited population of people who are voting. So it's much more important to try and drive as many voters as you can to the polls to vote for the question, so that you can ensure that, you know, your special interest is heard at the polls.
That's excellent point, Kristen, because let's just run through the calendar just for a little bit so you understand what Kristen's talking about there. 2023, right now, we're in a gubernatorial race. There's only 5 races that are going to be on the ballot this year, all the constitutional officers for Kentucky. So your turnout typically for this year, 2023, is going to be low. 2024 is a presidential year. That's usually your highest turnout in a general election. 2025 is there are no elections that are held in 2025. They take 1 year off out of the 4-year cycle. Then you pick back up again in 2026, and those are your midterms. So then on that one, for that ballot, you will have a U.S. Senate race and the congressional race, and then that'll be it. And then you then go back to 2027, another governor's race year. 2028, you're back into a presidential year, and then 2029, you're off again. So that's where the timing of everything really becomes critical in terms of like how you try to plan out when these initiatives are going onto the ballot.
And we're getting towards the end of our time, and we're not going to have a question and answer period, but like I said, if you want to put questions in the chat box, we'll follow up with you. Also, our contact information is going to be on here, and we're going to be circulating this webinar and some additional information about our practice. Before we end, there's one more thing that I want to say, because I just think it's really important for people who are looking to enter into this space. If there's nothing else that you've taken away from today, it's that until you have your local authorization, your land use approval, your license, there's not a guarantee that you're going to be able to use the facility that you have identified to apply for your state license. So as you're negotiating leases, keep that in mind. We always recommend that you have some ability to get out of a lease if you aren't able to operate in that location. Because again, in my experience, I've had people come to me over and over again. I signed this 5-year lease. I purchased this property, and I've had to say many times, you're not going to be able to use that for cannabis cultivation or cannabis retail. And that's a really expensive mistake. So thank you all again for participating with us, Kristen and David. This was such a pleasure. It's really, there's going to be a lot that's happening in the next year. There's going to be rulemaking. There's going to be local rulemaking, state rulemaking. We are going to be kind of following all of that. If you have questions, please reach out. I mean, one of the benefits of Denton's Kentucky offices, DBG, is that we not only have our full service law firm who have attorneys with expertise in transactional, tax, employment, government relations, litigation. We also have a really deep cannabis bench. We've done all this cannabis work before in other states and really have the ability to red flag and advise you through many of these issues, despite the fact that cannabis is going to be a new market in Kentucky.